Welcome to those who are here for the first time, and a warm welcome to those who are here again. When I was given this topic, the Wheel of Time, I was very aware that it's a challenging subject. It's not challenging to speak about it, but it's challenging for those who are here for the first time maybe to grasp all the connections that implies. And I'll give you a couple of thoughts about it before I take up the subject, in a sense to recap from things that you may have heard here in this house in the past, but for those who are here for the first time, to put it into the context of other things that you may already be aware of. And normally, this subject would be taken up, having taken up the subject to firstly the soul. The understanding that when I say I am the living being, the eternal, immortal being of light here in the center of the forehead. And we begin with that assumption that everybody here is aware of the soul. And the second assumption is that you understand also that the human soul, when it comes to the end of one life, then it leaves that particular costume. That's the language we would use, that we wouldn't describe it as death, because the soul is eternal. And all the traditions have mentioned that. So we would say that the soul leaves that particular body, that costume it is occupied for however many years, and the soul instantly leaves and enters a mother's womb. It immediately finds another home, and then after some months there's another birth. And so this is a whole new concept that when I take you through the subject of the Wheel of Time, it's going to assume that you understand this and accept it. And if you don't, that's okay. We can take up questions at the end of this session, this first session, and then we'll see how we get on further from there. The third assumption, and again, I think you're here and so you would be familiar with the concept, and that is the subject of God. That we believe that God exists, firstly, but also that the form of God is the same as the soul actually, just a point of light. And the image that you see here, this point of light, is a representation, of course, a large representation, but that point of divine light who is the absolute, the supreme. And so, let's begin. As I say, these are important concepts that I just wanted to set as the foundation, as a base for whatever further. We begin the journey, and when I say we begin, I mean all souls. When we begin our journey, we come here into a world which is described as utopia, paradise, the Garden of Eden, dream time. Different cultures have given it different names, and you probably know of many other names than I've mentioned. But it takes up the idea that there is a time when in reality, here on earth, the world was in its perfect state, in its purest state. Because the human soul at that time was in its purest state. And so when we're talking about the Wheel of Time, we're talking about the interaction of three different energies together. The energy of the human spirit, the energy of God, and thirdly, the energy of matter. Because the understanding is that souls come from somewhere. We'll talk about that later maybe. But souls come from somewhere, and they come onto the earth and they take on a human body, and because all the elements of the world are completely pure, imagine pure water, pure air, pure earth, everything in its purest state. Well, one thing is that it'll be very beautiful. When there's clean air, when there's clear light, everything seems that much more colorful than it would normally. So anything that's clean and pure is usually also very beautiful. And so when the soul comes into the human body at that time, the elements of matter, of nature, are at their purest. And so soul and body together make up a very beautiful human being. There's a very lovely vision that the founder had that actually led to the start of the university. And it describes that situation that I'm talking about. He didn't understand the philosophy behind it at the time he saw this vision, but I'll share it with you in a few words. What he saw was what appeared to be stars come down from the sky, and as they entered the physical dimension, they took on a human form. And although it was human, in that it had 2 arms and 2 legs and 2 eyes, but it was very different to the human. It was divine, in that it seemed as if these beings had no mass. They were made of translucent light. They had bodies, but bodies were not like you see our bodies of heavy-duty bones and flesh. But that star entered this being, and it radiated light. And when these beings interacted with each other, it was poetry in their communication. And most of the communication was not through words, but through the eyes. And so you could pick up what I was thinking, and I could pick up what you were thinking, and there would be no cross wires there. And when they did speak, the speech was like music that was flowing. And when they moved, it was like a dance. And so he saw all of this just in that first vision that he had. So what he was seeing was the beginning of a new world, a world in which he could see was a world of love, of truth, of purity, of peace, of joy, of abundance. All of these things were there. And his understanding was that such a world was about to come. Now the question, how, I'm going to tell you after the next 55 minutes. Because that was a subject that he was interested in. Well, how? The term that we use here to describe that world is the Golden Age. An age of gold. And when you think about gold, not the value that people and banks put on that natural mineral today, that metal, but think of gold in terms of the quality of its substance. Rain, water, air, nothing impacts it. It stays beautiful and bright and shining no matter what. And so the state of the soul at that time, the golden aged soul, completely pure. And of course the relationship with its own body, one of the state of lightness that I've described, but also the relationships with each other, filled with that purity and love and joy. If you think about a wheel, many things come to mind, but in particular, if you stand at any one point of the wheel, and then you move on to the next point of the wheel, and the next point, what's happened is that you've started shifting directions. You're not going to stand still. As the wheel moves, you're no more facing true north, but you're moving, and you're moving, and you're moving. And so the wheel is continually taking you in a different direction. And so the story of one human soul, or many human souls on a journey together, is the story of continuous movement, which is the way of nature. It's not the way of that which is artificial, but certainly it's the way nature functions. If you think about a little tiny bud that you saw in early June, within a week, it's become a fuller bud. Within a few days, it started to open up, and within the next few days, you have the bloom at its best. And then after a couple of days, maybe even 2 or 3 days, no more than that, it's no more as beautiful as you saw it when it was at its best. It's already changed. The color has changed a little. The form has just slightly changed. And then within another few days, it begins to wilt, it begins to droop a little. And then it's gone. And then yes, it also has another phase in its journey in which from the flower it becomes a fruit and so on and so on. But that flower that was so perfect is no more. And so nothing in nature stays the same from 2 moments on. The clock keeps ticking on, and the wheel of time in terms of the universe keeps ticking on, and there's constant movement, And can't ask the question why? It is. That's the way nature is. Why is gold gold? It is. And so time keeps moving on, and the direction of the human soul keeps changing. So from that state in which it was absolutely perfect and pure, by the time it's moved around, slowly, it gradually is losing its beauty and its power. You use your little Walkman or whatever new gadgets they have today. I think I'm a little bit out of touch with the times. Nobody uses Walkman anymore. But whatever is the latest gadget. But it's got some energy cell in it, some battery, and after some time, that cell will finish and you need to get a new one. And so energy that's being used is continually, gradually being lost. And so the human soul, in that fullest state of perfect energy, and there's a gradual loss. And so the purity is changing, the power has changed, the beauty has changed, and so the goodness also gradually changing. But in that period, we're going to look at the cycle in terms of quarters. So this first quarter, perfect harmony. The soul within itself. Today where there's a conflict of desires and conscience and the intellect telling you one thing and your heart telling you another thing. In that perfect state, perfect harmony within all the bits of myself, within my own inner being. And then, perfect harmony in terms of the soul and body. Nowadays, a child will try to reach up and can't quite make it. Or a person who's a bit older will try to lift their leg and their knee won't quite bend. And so And the soul is aspiring for something, but the body isn't always cooperating as we would like it to, right? Very much so. That's a story for many of us. But at that moment, thought and matter working absolutely together. So thought making the body function in a very natural and easy and harmonious way. And so the movement described like a dance, the words described as music, and so on. And everything happening naturally. I don't have to ask you for anything, because there is no need. All my needs are being fulfilled. In another description, it's been called, I'll give you the Hindi name because it describes it very well, Krit Yug, a world in which it's like everything's been done already. You don't have to work hard, you don't have to labor. Like the farmer world, there'll still be farmers, there'll be all the people that we know of in this universe, but a very human world, but with that divinity. So for example, the farmers will sprinkle the seeds on the soil, but they won't have to dig to let the soil be ready to take root. The soil will be ready, it'll be prepared. And so the farmer just sows the seeds and, hey presto, they flourish and ripen and bear the fruits. And so everything in a natural way, without any form of labor or hard work. Does it remind you of some of the descriptions of the Garden of Eden, where the human being doesn't have to toil for anything? And so that world, as I say, all the different scriptures have described it in different ways, but that's the image that they show us. Not just relationships between humans perfect, but between humans and nature perfect. Imagine being able to put out your hand and not just the lamb coming to feed from it, but the lion also coming to feed from it. And so the image again that's come in all the scriptures, the lamb and the lion sipping water together at the same pool. And not just a description of the animal kingdom, but also related to human personalities. Today, someone with a very strong personality, and you're ready to eat up somebody who has a meek and mild personality. And someone with a meek personality will run away rather than have to face such a person. They'd rather go away. But all types of personalities being able to live together in harmony, with respect, with dignity. Because the soul is in its state of dignity and self-respect, that dignity extends in an automatic and natural way to everything and everyone around it. And so really that state of perfection on all levels. But gold becomes a little old. And so when you've got something new, it's different to after you've had it 50 years or it's been passed on from your grandmother or your great-grandmother. And so within a space of time, it becomes old, and you can see that it's now old. It's still valuable, it's still beautiful, but it's now old. And so the human soul gradually coming through the wheel of time, and the direction has been changing, it's been shifting. Every time there's movement, there's a change, and you've been a quarter of the way around the cycle, around that wheel. And so now, at that moment, it's quite visibly different. As the gold was gradually becoming older and older, you couldn't see that much difference. You wouldn't have been able to tell 7 days ago it was like this, or a year ago it was like this. It was so gradual you didn't even notice it. But yes, after some time you'll say, yes, it looks quite different now. But now, the shift from that period of the golden age to another period, and we describe that as the the Silver Age. And so the human soul has lost a quarter of its power. The purity of the human soul has decreased. The conditions of the world have changed. And so no more that state of perfection, but still, the Silver Age, still very, very beautiful. But the difference between gold and silver, gold always sparkling, but silver, a little bit of tarnish that comes in from the wind, the air, the climate, whatever. But you give it a quick rub, and again it shines. And so it's not a change that's irreversible. It's a change that's beginning very slowly, very gradually. And so that untarnished, unblemished state has changed. And so now the Silver Age. But yet still a world in which there's unity, harmony, oneness on all levels. But when you've gone through half the cycle, then 50% of the power gone, 50% of the purity gone, and now there's a very, very dramatic shift. And so from a consciousness which is pure and divine, absolutely spiritual, the soul forgets. It develops amnesia. It forgets its own identity, and from that moment on, there's a change, a dramatic change of direction. When you were moving from true north, gradually around the wheel, it was so slow that you didn't notice. But now you're down here, and now there is a big difference. And the consciousness swings from being spiritual consciousness to being material consciousness. Association of identity comes now with matter. Spiritual consciousness, and the association is of the soul and spirit, but now soul forgetting itself and identity comes into the influence of matter. And within the language we use here, we use the term soul conscious, and then we use the word body conscious. And so consciousness of matter and a material identity. And at that moment, because of this loss of spiritual awareness and the influence of matter, there's a very dramatic shift, not just in terms of soul and body, but also in terms of human beings and matter. Previously, perfect harmony and cooperation, and now a retaliation of nature. It's very interesting how today we're beginning to explore again the relationship of mind and the environment. And what is it that human consciousness has done to the environment? And in the Golden and Silver Age, the mind absolutely non-violent, and so matter cooperating with peace, with love. Nature there to serve human beings. But now the change, and there's a huge upheaval that happens within nature. And people ask, well, if there was such a time as a golden age, and everything existed in the way that I'm describing, now what happened to it? Where did it go? The scriptures give some indication, but of course then you have to put the bits of the jigsaw puzzle together and try and understand. The Garden of Eden, the banishment, remember that story? And the reason for the banishment? Because they were tempted. And the temptation was to eat of the tree that was carrying the fruit of knowledge. Now normally you'd say that knowledge is a good thing. knowledge is of benefit, it's of value. So why were they forbidden this? Because it was knowledge of matter. It wasn't knowledge of the spirit. They had that awareness, but it was knowledge of matter. And when knowledge of matter came into the picture, and identity switched into the consciousness of matter, consciousness of the body, that's when the banishment happens. And in the scriptures in India, they say that Dwarka, the period of heaven, went below the waves. Here they talk about Atlantis disappearing in the ocean. The banishment. They talk about Pandora's box being opened. So a world in which there's no illness, nothing that's negative. And yet, somebody opens Pandora's box and all the illnesses of the world fly out, and then you try and put them back into the box, and it's impossible. And so it's all describing this particular period of transition from the Silver Age to the Copper Age. But nature has such upheaval at that time that everything goes either below the earth or below the waves, and we don't have artifacts, we don't have factual remains of that period. The only place that the story remains is in human consciousness and in the legends that we have, the myths that we have. And because we don't have any tangible things to prove that world, people sometimes dismiss us and say, well, maybe it didn't exist at all. But if there's something that's existing in human consciousness worldwide through the ages within every tradition, that's saying that there must be some truth there, some reality there. Because all people, all ancient cultures, modern civilization, we all hold that there was such a world at that time. But at that moment, the end of the Silver Age, and so much upheaval that that world finishes. We don't see it anymore. It's not there. And human consciousness, such a loss of power that now, because of ignorance of our own identity, negativity has come in. Ego and anger and greed and attachment and lust. All of these things begin at that midway period within the cycle, within the wheel. And the wheel has started to move now in the opposite direction. It's been gradually coming down, slowly, but now it's in the opposite direction. And so from that moment on, human suffering beginning. But within the darkness of human suffering, one bright light that comes at that moment is the memory of God. Golden Age and Silver Age, God has made us so free, so independent, that we don't need God. Everyone in their perfect state of following spiritual laws, spiritual principles, so you don't need anyone to tell you, do or don't do. You're automatically following the natural laws of the universe and the divine laws of God. So all of that is happening automatically. So no need to go to a temple, a mosque or a church or anything like that. Everybody, the embodiment of divinity, and so who are you going to worship? Why should you worship? Who are you going to cry out to? Don't need to call out. But the switch. And now, in that period of sorrow, which just begins, the memory comes back. The memory awakens of some being who at some point had given happiness when there had been sorrow. And so the memory of God re-enters the human world. Parents want their children to be independent. They don't want it that the child is 30 and is not earning his own way, is not able to take care of himself, herself. And so God's role also has been to prepare humanity, to allow it to come to the stage of divinity where God is no longer needed. But once that divinity is lost and the human weaknesses come in, from that moment the sorrow triggers the memory of God. And so the worship of God, the prayers, the call, all of that begins at that time. But once out, the negativity is all around and it's becoming stronger and stronger. How do you capture it and reverse it? So the darkness is slowly, slowly growing. And messengers come on earth to try and light a little candle to show us the path. And yes, there is illumination. Each one of the prophets, each one of the messengers who have come have brought a powerful, beautiful message that has helped humanity at that time. But if you light a candle, it'll give you a little bit of illumination, but it won't take away the darkness. It won't be equal to the sun. And so little lights come on our path to try and help us. But the darkness grows heavier and stronger. Negativity continues to increase. And think about copper and how copper gets impacted by the elements of nature to the point where it turns green. It actually changes color. And how do you remove that? You can't just rub it away. And so the consciousness has now been, human consciousness, has now been impacted by matter to such an extent that it's actually changed our awareness. And so the poison that's come in has entered the soul, and so the negativity has now become part of our makeup, to the point where today, if you talk to people, they'll say, but anger, that's the way of life. How can you have a world without attachment? Of course, greed is essential if you want to survive in today's world. So these negative forces, they actually become embedded in the soul itself. And the soul has totally forgotten its original state of divinity. It's not able to recapture that awareness of its own relationship with the divine. It's remembering God, but doesn't quite connect and is not able to draw that power because it doesn't know how, it doesn't have the full information. And so somehow we get through the period of the Copper Age, but still, in those periods when we're experiencing God's love, God's grace, God's blessings, through the effort we've made, through the devotion we've had, through our love for truth, we felt something that's good in our life. And there's been some good action that's been done, some donation, some charity, something for the sake of others, not just for ourselves. But yet, the wheel continues to move on. And now, of course, it's moving completely in the opposite direction towards the left-hand side. And the energy level is still getting depleted. We still don't know how to refill our own energy. And so, quarter and half, and now the 3/4 point has gone by. And so from the period of the Copper Age, the Hindi words are very interesting. Satyug, the age of truth, the golden age. Treta, 3/4 still remaining, the silver age. And then Dwapar. And there's two different concepts that come in. Half the energy lost, but also the division that's come in, the division between humans and humans. And so the age of division begins from that moment on. The oneness is lost. And now, 3/4 gone, and we come to the period described as Kali Yuga, the Iron Age. And the word Kal means death. It also means time. And it also means the age of the machine. So what do you see happening around you today? Is it the golden age? Not really. Is it the silver age? No. Is it the copper age? So we are now in that period of the Iron Age. And from the moment the Iron Age begins, even the purity of love or devotion that we had in our search for truth and search for God, even that changes its form. So even religion now becomes a method of commerce. Do I need to say any more? So that carries on in its period of degradation. The state of the human soul, it's lost a lot of its energy. It's now in its final quarter period. It's the age of many wars. It's the age of much strife. And each one of the forces of negativity is continually increasing through this period. The darkness continues to grow. The little candles have tried to give us light, but the darkness can't be averted with those. It carries on. And so by the time we come to the end of the Iron Age, you can see the state that we are in today. Every religion is now split into many different branches. Never mind that there's many religions, but every religion is split into many different sections. The human mind, what's going on in there? A state of chaos. And we try to fix things here and fix things there, and we're into the habit of doing. Remember the Golden Age, where we communicated simply with the power of thought. And so now you've got the Tower of Babel. Many things happening. Multitasking has become fashionable. Somebody was writing about how even in the quiet moments we used to have, say for example when you were traveling from A to B, that was your quiet space. But it wasn't empty space. It was a time to process. It was a time to reflect. It was a time to create something new. Well, all that quiet space-time has now gone. So many machines in the age of the machine that every single moment of your quiet time, you're either knocking away on your BlackBerry or you're receiving a phone call or you're surfing on the net on your mobile. It's constant doing. And the energy of the human spirit is being drained so extensively that even on that physical level where we needed a few minutes of quiet, even say where until a little while ago, people used to say grace before meals. And at the end of the meal, they'd say thank you to God. So that moment of silence, of acknowledgement of the divine, or that moment of silence to even prepare the body to be able to receive food, well, you're on your BlackBerry or your phone, and how are you going to thank God for what you're about to receive? Or you're moving around and you're munching a sandwich at the same time, or you're driving and, So there just isn't space anymore. And so the power of the soul lost and total emptiness. People speak about a spiritual bankruptcy, which is the state of the world today. But it's the human soul that's become bankrupt, and so the conditions as we see them today. Lots and lots of methods and remedies and possibilities, but actually we experiment with all of those things and there's more suffering, there's more illnesses, there's more disasters, there's more war, there's more strife, there's more violence on a day-to-day basis. And that's a global story. It's a story of London, but it's also the story anywhere else in the world. A little bit less, a little bit more, not much to choose from, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but that's the state of the world, absolutely the state of darkness. So what happens next? What happens after that? End of story? Yeah? You think so? The soul is eternal, God is eternal, and the world is eternal. 3 things that are eternal. And so yes, the form of the soul keeps changing, the form of matter and the cycle of the world and the story of the wheel of time keeps changing, but it doesn't end. Think about the wheel. And I've said first and second and third and fourth quarter, that in fact the reality is that if there's a wheel, there isn't a beginning and there isn't an end. So yes, in terms of trying to make sense of what's going on, we'll use this model of first quarter, second quarter, and so on and so on. But in reality, the wheel keeps turning. And so even when it's come completely contrary to the direction where it had started from, it can move back again into that phase in which it was a true north and then it was beginning to move. But it needs a bit of a push. Now who's going to give it a push? We don't seem to manage it, do we? So who's going to give the wheel a push? And that's where the incarnation of God or God's intervention actually happens to nudge the wheel along so that then it comes back to true north. But the wheel is the external symbol. What's happening is actually the story of the soul. And so God's intervention is not so much with a physical wheel, but God's intervention is everything to do with the human spirit. And so God intervening in human affairs to be able to awaken the soul, enlighten the soul, empower the soul, and renew. So that the task of recreation begins in here. The soul exists, but God recreates the human soul. And what is the purpose of that recreation? There's a very beautiful expression that comes in the scriptures, East and West, and that is that human beings were created in the image of God. Which image? This image? This image? This image? Male? Female? Nothing to do with that. But the human soul, recreated in God's image, God, the ocean of peace, the ocean of love, the being of absolute truth, the almighty authority, the ocean of compassion, the ocean of happiness. I've mentioned just a few of the attributes, but carry on, carry on, carry on, carry on, with all the different names you know of God and the praise of God. And so God's intervention is to recreate human beings in that image. As is the parent, so be the child. And so through the process of awakening and enlightening and empowering and so on, the transformation takes place of the human spirit. And once the human spirit has been transformed, the world automatically goes through its transformation. But a little but comes in. The human spirit gets transformed through God's intervention, but the earth is by now a bit of a mess. The minds have been depleted, everything's been polluted, everything's been messed around with, rivers have been changed in their course, dams have been built. Now, how do you put all of that right again? How do you put back the forests in the Amazon so that the earth has its lungs back again? Bit of a job, isn't it? But part of that process, we're beginning to see that process, where you had the state of human beings in total cooperation with nature. Then you had the situation of nature reacting against human beings. And now today, absolutely completely, where there's been so much aggression against all types of life and nature itself. And so we are seeing now all of this come together in huge, huge, massive disasters that are happening across the world. And so through all of that, the liberation of all human souls to journey back home, the cleansing of the earth so that the earth is again purified. Think of all the elements, and there's an image that has been shown in the scriptures, and it's sometimes portrayed in theatre. It's called the Dance of Natraj, and what it's showing is the image of Shankar. Complicated story, but just the point of the story, that this form of amazing, beautiful dance and all the elements dancing around. And so what it's portraying is the cleansing, all the elements in upheaval, but think of a huge washing machine and going through all of that, and then everything settling. And then nature settling again, and now nature in its pure virgin state, perfect, green, balanced, human souls cleansed and purified, have gone to their home, and now the journey begins once more. And the wheel of time is able to move on. And you remember where we started? We started with those stars coming from up above and entering the human dimension and taking on a human form. And so the golden age begins again, which again fits in with what we understand of how nature works, that there's a time of growth, there's a time of decay, and then there's a time of change. And so the same thing here. You have your spring, you have your summer, you have your autumn, you have your winter. And in winter, a child looks at the trees and says, but how can there ever be life in these trees? And yet, spring comes and there's life in those same lifeless trees. And so today we look at the world and we say, but what can we do about it? Is there anything that can be done? And we try very hard and we struggle and we're not able to find a way. Sometimes people feel hopeless, but no, always, always hope. And it's because the soul is eternal, God is eternal, and matter is eternal. And so the story of humanity is also an eternal story, a story of immortality, except it goes through different chapters. But the good news, that the chapter we've been through in recent times, in which everything seems to be in a state of decay and collapse, it's actually also, on the one side, the decay, but on the other side, a renewal. Think about how the darkest period comes. When does it come? When does the darkest period of the night come? Just before dawn. And dawn comes, and light begins to enter the world. But when dawn breaks, again, it's a quirk of nature, but when dawn breaks, very, very few people are awake to see the break of light. It comes very quietly, and then the day begins. And so the period that we're passing through now, exactly right now, is this period of the end of the night and the dawn having broken. We're not waiting for it to break anymore, but the dawn has appeared. There is light on the horizon, and the day is beginning. And so we're the lucky ones who are awake and seeing the break of dawn, and we're seeing day begin. But the beginning of the day and the elimination of darkness happens in here, because the whole of the story of the wheel, the cycle of time, the wheel of time, is a story of the human soul and how the soul goes through its immortal journey. And now at this point, at the moment when the soul has lost everything, it doesn't even have any more faith. A little while ago, I don't see those posters up now, but a little while ago in London there were these huge big hoardings, and the question was, does God really exist? And there were 3 little boxes at the bottom, and you had to tick yes, no, maybe. So within the last 100 years or so, absolute breakdown even of faith. And so a state in which no more spiritual power, no more faith in God, no more trust in each other. What happened to trust in relationships? It's gone. No more values. And it's not even just a spiritual place that's talking about these things, but when was it, about nearly now 3 years ago, when the financial crisis broke, the mainstream media, establishment media, were talking about that this isn't just a financial crisis, but it's a crisis of values. I remember that coming out so clearly, and I thought, well, this is light at the end of the tunnel, that people are now beginning to understand that what's really going on is the loss of values. And so that's come to a point where now we know that things have to get sorted out, things have to be put right, but we don't have that capacity, we don't have that power. And so the intervention of God. You see, when everything is fine, God doesn't need to intervene. And then, when things begin to go slightly wrong, then God sends his messengers to try and help us find the right way. But when the message of the messengers gets forgotten, and we get hooked on the messenger, that's usually what's happened. The message has been forgotten, and we've simply got hooked on the words or the messenger. There's no more power in that anymore. And so you come to the Iron Age where everything just gets split and confused. And so then at such a time, it's no more a time for sending messengers, they haven't worked. It hasn't been possible to change tack. God's direct intervention to again bring about the day. The other image that fits in completely within this idea is the sun appears. When the dawn has broken, it's because the sun has appeared. And when the sun appears, then there's light. Then you don't need the little candles anymore. And so then, the beginning of the day, and why should you have a little candle when you've got the sun? It's all its full glory. And so no need for all the systems and customs that we've been creating and building up, but in a very natural way, following in the light of the sun all the natural spiritual laws of the universe. And so this is in essence the story of the wheel of time. Very different to the story of time that we've thought about usually, in which time is linear. But in fact, when you think about anything in the universe, is there ever any straight line? Only artificially created. If you think about the natural universe, there's nothing which is a straight line. What appears to be a straight line is part of a larger circle, a larger cycle. Seems to be, but in fact it's also part of that larger circle. And so we look at time just from the span of one lifetime, and we think there's a beginning and there's an end. But how did that beginning happen? And what happens after the end? Now there's many, many stories about it. But if we link up the story of karma, and the word karma is very simple, action. That's it. No other nuances, just action. But action and reaction, it's a story of the seed and the tree. So at which point of time do you begin with the first action where you see reaction? So at what time does action and reaction begin? Where does it begin? Where did the first seed come from? The tree. Where did the first tree come from? The seed. And so you see again that continuity without a break. And so whether it's lines or karma or seeds and trees that we're thinking about, talking about part of a larger circle. But of course what's happened is that where human minds have become so impacted by matter that we forget that there's such a thing as soul or spirit separate to body, then of course we can't think beyond birth or after death, because then identity, matter just caught up with this one birth. And so it becomes very, very short span. And so yes, within the short-term span it seems as if it's a straight line, but extend it both ways and you come to a cycle. And so the eternity of the soul, that's come in all the scriptures. The eternity of God, again the same. But usually many people think that there's a beginning to the world and an end to the world. And what Raj Yoga teaches is a little bit different, that just as these two are eternal, so too matter is eternal, has always been and will always be. But yes, the role of the soul within a specific context, beginning in a specific way, and the story of humanity beginning and coming to an end, but again, the new story of humanity beginning. And so where many people feel that it's time for a new story, it's an expression I hear about, that it's time to be able to tell a new story. Something is stirring within human consciousness, and we're awakening to that memory of a new beginning again. What I'm going to do is have a couple of minutes of meditation in which I'll guide you into the meditation, and then we'll have Time for questions, and then again a meditation to finish. I focus my thoughts in the awareness of the eternal being that I am, the soul. And in this awareness, I go beyond the limitations of the physical world to the dimension beyond, to a world of light, to my home. And in my home, I stay quiet, pure and peaceful. And now from that world, I come down into a world of purity. The golden aged world, which I take on a costume of matter, but matter that is filled with light, matter so pure that the energy of life, of light, is filled within it. I journey through the golden age, enjoying the love, the happiness, and the abundance there. And I come to the Silver Age. I come to the space where now it's the cool light of the moon in contrast to the brilliant light of the sun. And here, in the Silver Age, life is still a playground, and I enjoy myself in that world. Time goes ticking on without my being aware of it. Then suddenly, dramatically, somehow, I've lost that world of paradise. And now, here in the Copper Age, I'm lost. I've lost myself. I've lost contact with my own inner being. And I look for happiness out there. And in my pain and sorrow, I call out to God. And God loves His children. And God helps His children. And so God sends many messengers who try and help me. But I don't know how to connect with the Almighty and I continue to lose power. I continue to fall, and I reach the last chapter, the age of iron. Everything rusty, everything poisonous, everything influencing other things with negativity. And in this darkness, in my deep, deep sorrow, I no longer know where to search for truth, but God finds me. I did not know where to look for God anymore, but God finds me, and God touches the soul and awakens it out of the sleep of ignorance, casts away the amnesia, so that I remember who I am. I am the eternal soul, the child of the Supreme. And in this awakening, God ignites the light of the soul, and the almighty authority shares His power so that I, the soul, can be recharged. And each moment, as I stay in the remembrance of the Supreme, I gather strength. In this process of recharging, I am renewed, recreated, peace, purity, love, truth, and joy are the treasures I have within myself. The gifts that God has given me. And in this awareness, I prepare to journey home again and to journey forward to the Golden Age. Om Shanti. We have a roving mic for anybody who'd like to ask questions.
My name is Juliana. I using the intelligence as the Divine Supreme gave us, I tend to go to believe with quite a great certainty from a very deep part of my being that I don't know actually how to explain it, because it cannot be explained. It's like when I get this so profound relationship with God, and I feel that great certainty that this planet where we live is not the world, because otherwise I would be so confined, things that the cycles of our lives would be confined in this planet that we perceive as the earth. So, because we are here in this planet, and sometimes I think if I am on the surface of this ball known as Earth, or if I am in the middle, of course it does no matter. But in terms of my intelligence, when I evolve more and more, where my soul goes to carry on this cycle, I wonder. It's just it's not something that bothers me, but I find this infinity so wise that I think there is something, because otherwise we would carry on this and this and this without really. It's like I am good, and then I go to the other stage where I lose the connection with goodness, and then I regain again. So what would be the reason for that? What would be the intelligent principle of God in this? I wonder. So if you could just give a little bit of a hint, I could, I don't know. It's not I am grab in the messenger, okay? But it's in a way, because I think this is, it seems to me that is part of your whole in this world, in this incarnation where you are at the moment. But perhaps with some things you could help me to be more, in balance with these thoughts. Thanks very much.
I think there's a few questions merged within that. Okay, one thing that I want to respond to is all the planets of the universe and so on and so on. And yes, there's all of this, and who knows what there is out there. But what I do know is that my story of karma is with human beings, and it's here. And the cycle can be described in many ways. And one would be to say that that state of, the first part is the state of a life of freedom, liberation in life. And the next part is, halfway through, is a period of a state of bondage. Bondage with humans, bondage with vices, bondage with matter, lots of different things. And the offer that God is making us now is to be able to experience freedom. Freedom from all the karma that I've been engaged in up until now, so that I'm able to settle it all. So my concern at this moment is the whole subject of settlement, being able to settle my karma, so that then I can experience that state of freedom and liberation. So there might well be other planets and other things happening there, I don't know. But my concern and my focus is now here, to settle my karma withal and take up the invitation that's coming from God to achieve that state of liberation and freedom. And then the second thing, what would be the point of all of this? I go through the cycle, and there's another cycle, and another cycle, and I go through another cycle. think about a child, and a child wakes up fresh and goes out to play. And at first it's not just one child, but it's many children, and they're all playing together. And you're hearing the sounds of laughter and happiness come and reach you. And then at a certain point, they get a bit tired. And because they get tired, they get a bit irritable. And instead of hitting the ball with a bat, they start bashing each other with a bat. And so by the end of the day, they're exhausted and they're grubby, they're dirty. And so the parents have to take the children home and they wash them, they clean them, they send them to sleep, they feed them. And the next day, if the parent were to tell the child, well, yesterday you got dirty and tired, so you mustn't go out to play again today. You must stay at home. Just sit quietly. Is the child going to do that? The impetus is going to be that I want to go out and play again. Yes, I know I got tired and dirty last time, but I want to go out and play again. And so that state of silence in the home is a beautiful experience, but after a certain time, then the motivation of the soul is to come and begin the cycle again, the wheel again, to experience that stage of perfection, the perfection of heaven, and come and play in the world, because that's what life is about, just the sharing of love and the sharing of happiness in that period. And so at this moment we feel there's so much sorrow happening, so much bondage, why should I carry on? But once a soul's experienced that transformation and is filled with that spiritual power, then it wants to express that spiritual energy in its life. And so the cycle begins. Don't believe me. Don't accept it. Just let it sit with you.
Subhasha, this is a very simple question. In a circle comprises of, according to mathematical terms, 0 to 360 degrees. Now, according to wheel of time, which year is going on from 0 to, if you start from 0 onwards at this moment, which year is on? Thank you.
Think about infinity. No beginning and no end. And so this is what the knowledge has been teaching us, that there's infinity, and you can't say this is the first cycle or the second or the third or whichever. But each cycle is perfect in itself. But where we are at this moment is very close to the beginning of the Golden Age. So that's where we are now. Okay, last question and then time for a short meditation.
My question is that once we reach the Golden Age, and that's the next step, and everybody's at a different karmic level, so maybe, someone who's a little bit more spiritual would be more entitled to enter the Golden Age, where someone like Hitler might need to take many more births to wash off that karma that he's going through. So if time doesn't stop and we have to enter the Golden Age, what about those souls that are actually not as advanced as the souls who, in some ways, I wouldn't say deserve, but as you said, every action creates a reaction. Maybe they've had too many negative actions for them to understand or even want to be or go to the Golden Age. So what about those souls?
Another part of the story, I've shared as much as I can within the time that we have, but another part of the story is that at the beginning of the Golden Age, when those stars first come down, it's just a few. And then gradually, as the wheel continues to move, more and more stars, more and more souls are coming from their home onto the world stage. Think about a drama, a play, and actors playing their role on the stage. Not everybody comes on all together. There's a few, and then more, and more, and more. And so the entry point of souls coming into the cycle, coming into the drama, is different. But the end point, when the drama finishes, the curtain comes down, then the time to go home for all the actors is the same. And so when Kali Yuga finishes, the Iron Age completes, it comes to its end, all souls go home together. And then those who've made the preparation, who've created that divinity within themselves, come first into the Golden Age. And then souls come according to their level of effort or level of purity or even their level of power. To have the power to go through the whole cycle is a lot greater than the power that's required to go through the last quarter. And so those who've made that effort to recharge and fill that power are the ones who go through that cycle. I'm very aware that every question and every answer is probably creating 10 more questions. I'm totally aware of that. But what I'd like us to do is to just spend a few moments in silence. And the earlier meditation was the journey through the cycle. Now this is a meditation to actually step away from the cycle. Coming to the awareness of the eternal being that I am, I step away from this body, from the stage, and allow myself to see things from a distance. And in this awareness, I just let myself be with myself. I, the eternal soul, the being of light. I have no beginning, and I don't have an ending. I am, I have been, and I always will be. I, the eternal being, free, filled with my original qualities. I keep this awareness of eternity, and I come back down here onto the world stage to continue to play my part. But while doing so, keeping this awareness of eternity. Om Shanti.